as we were talking about the this chapter, this is a continuation from the previous chapter. So we're just going to finally touch on a couple things and be done, because chapter 5 pretty much dealt with cost, volume, profit. 6 is adding a little more to it, but I'd like to be done today and then start on 7 next week. Okay? Any questions?
So this is chapter 6.
We're working on 6. I know, it's going fast, isn't it?
Yes.
Hopefully spring will be here soon too. So as we have continued on, the whole purpose of this analysis is to really determine what we need to produce, and potentially what type of products we choose to produce if we've got a limited amount of determining how much of that contribution will go towards fixed cost. In preparing a contribution income statement, we lump all our variable costs together, we lump our fixed costs together. We don't take into account and separate the cost of goods sold from operating expenses, do we? We lump them all together. Something important to be aware of on this test, that there's a unique income statement as it relates to CVP analysis. A lot of what we're going to see here with chapter 6 is delving into what if analysis. If this happens, then what's the best output in manufacturing products? So when variable cost increase, that's going to allow for less to go into fixed cost. What do we need to do to break even? Or can we possibly alter the product line so there's more going into fixed costs to cover those costs? I think we talked about this, that based on the variable costs increasing, and if the fixed costs also get reduced, then what's the new break-even point? And we've used that also to determine, based on the break-even point and what we'd like to anticipate in net income, what do we need to, how many units do we need to produce? Crop Catchers calculates its contribution margin to be less than 0. We talked about this yesterday. Which statement is true? Its fixed costs are less than its variable cost per unit. Its profits are greater than its cost. The company should sell more units, or its selling price is less than its variable cost. If its contribution margin is less than 0, how do we determine the contribution margin? Sales minus what? Variable cost equal the contribution margin. What happens if that contribution margin is minus 20? The variable costs are higher than the sales. We're doing something wrong here, aren't we? To have products that we're not even selling to meet the variable cost. Break-even sales in units. Now, we're talking about various sales mixes. So in this case, determining what % should we process in one type of product and what should we process in another type. Sales mix in this case for this company would be, if sales are 80% printers and 20% computers, the sales mix is 80-20. Sales mix is important because sometimes, depending on what the products are, they're going to have different contribution margins to ultimately pay down those fixed costs. Companies can compute break-even sales for a mix of 2 or more products by determining the weighted average unit contribution margin on all the products. Here we have Vargo Video. It doesn't just sell camcorders, now it sells TV sets. Vargo sells its 2 products in the following amounts: 1,500 camcorders, 500 TVs. The sales mix is expressed as a function of total units sold. 1,500 units divided by 2,000 units total, the 15 plus the 5, is 75% camcorders, 25% TVs. Now we add to that, the selling price of the camcorders is $500, selling price of the TVs $1,000. The variable costs, $300 for the camcorder, $500 for the TV. So our sales mix, we're going to have a contribution margin of $200 on the camcorders, which we have 75% camcorders, 25% TVs. If we show our fixed cost being $275,000, we then can determine how this mix is going to pay for the fixed costs. So contribution margin of $200 at 75%, because that's the percent they make. Then our contribution margin of 500 TVs gives us what we call the weighted average unit contribution margin. So from that, we can determine how many units we need to produce just to break even. Okay? So 750 camcorders, 250 TVs are going to allow us to break even. With the break-even point of 1,000 units, Vargo has to sell 750 and 250. And that's going to then break even or cover all of our fixed costs. Just like we've been doing in previous examples, we can do it based on units or we can do it based on total sales. In this example, we have the indoor plant division and the outdoor plant division. The indoor plant division is 20% of the total, the outdoors 80%. So we determine our sales mix. From that, determine our contribution margin. And so if we look here, our contribution margin of $80,000 for indoor plants, divide that by our sales of 200, and we show a 40% contribution margin. If we do our outdoor plants, 240 divided by 800, we have a 30% contribution margin. So we can take the two of them and then do a weighted average of 32%. If we've got our fixed cost of $300,000, we basically can find out what our sales needs to be in order to break even or pay all of our fixed costs. So we're basically coming up with the information two different ways, based on units, based on sales dollars. Let's do how about this? Net income will be greater if more higher contribution margin units are sold than lower contribution margin units. Net income will be greater if more lower contribution margin units are sold than higher contribution margin units. Equal as long as total sales remain equal regardless of which product is sold, or unaffected by the changes in the mix of products. A, the more that we have the higher contribution margin units, we're going to make more money, aren't we? Because we're going to cover our fixed costs sooner. Okay, let's do a problem. Okay? We've got here let's get in here. And what page, I think we did one. Which problem did we just do yesterday? 6-1. 6-1? let's look at six two. And what page, guys, is 6.2 on? Okay. In the month of June, Jose Aber's beauty salon gave 4,000 haircuts, shampoos, and permanents at an average price of $30. During the month, fixed costs were $16,800 and variable costs were 75% of sales. Our first job is to determine the contribution margin in dollars per unit and as a ratio. So you guys, we're going to work together, but you're going to mainly help me calculate how we're going to determine this information. So we're going to start with the haircuts were 4,000. An average price of $30 is the service. Fixed cost were $16,800 and variable cost are 75% of sales. How are we going to determine the contribution margin in dollars? Anyone? We're going to take our 4,000 goods. Sales is going to be equal to 4,000 times $30, which is 120,000. And then our variable costs are equal to 75% of 120,000, which is 90,000, right? So our contribution margin is going to be our 120 minus our 90, or 30,000. Is that our contribution margin, guys? How do we determine our contribution margin per unit? What is the average cost? $30 minus 75% of $30 equals our contribution margin. 30 minus, what's our contribution, our variable cost? $22.50 gives us $7.50 contribution per service. Right? How can we figure out the ratio then? Two ways. We could take our $7.50, divide that by $30 is what? 25%? Could we also take our 30,000, divide that by 120,000? What's that equal? Same thing. Make sense? How are you guys doing? So one person says, I learned the importance of conversion cost and never thought about how to record units that were only partially complete. It makes the entire recording process easier, at least to me, to convert 200 units that are 25% complete to just say there's 50 units complete. It also helps me make units accounted for a lot easier to put in a cost schedule. Never thought of that. Isn't that true? I learned about the fraud triangle. Pressure, opportunity, and rational. Oh my gosh, this person remembers those 3 traits? Cool. How to calculate work in process, goods transferred out. ABC. 3 activities, planning, directing, and controlling, how it differs from financial accounting. How to tell the difference between direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Types of costing. I've learned nothing in this class. Joke. I mean, do you think someone's going to say that to me when they know it's worth? I got your attention. I thought you were asleep. Managerial accountings for internal users. We've learned how to write journal entries, calculate equivalent units using material cost and conversion costs. Activity-based costing assigns cost to activity pools. The difference between job order costing and process costing. Break-even points. CVP. Boy, that chick learned a lot. I've learned quite a few things in this class. Really like the topic of fixed or variable cost. I know about them before, but from microeconomics, but I've learned how having higher filled, I don't know. Okay. I have learned a bunch of different methods in which to account for costs and profits within a business. These different processes are best suited for different types of manufacturing products. All of these methods are to better the company by providing this information for people within the business to help out their costs, better allocate them, and maximize profit, which is all really the same thing. I've learned how manufacturing accounts for their costs using different methods like ABC, CVP, and that each and every cost is allocated to a category. I've learned the real meaning of fixed and variable costs. I've learned that managerial accounting is used for internal purposes and is therefore very detailed. Love it, guys. So you have learned something? Good. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay, now let's move on to 6.3. We finished 6. Oh, no, I didn't. We just finished A. I'm sorry. Now we need to use the contribution margin, compute the break-even point in dollars and in units. So we now know the break-even point. We now know the ratio of break-even. How are we going to determine the break-even in sales in dollars? What are the fixed costs? Told us the fixed cost. 16,800. Divide that by our ratio of 25% goes for fixed costs, which means 67,200 is what we need in sales to break even. If we calculate that into units, in units we would need 16,800, divide that by 750 a unit, or 2,240 services. Make sense? Guys, I think they need to up their rates. $30, pretty cheap, huh?
Also, they're giving a lot of perms, so maybe that's a little outdated.
I was thinking it, especially the word permanent. Okay. Did you men know that? Did you guys know that? Permanents are outdated. My husband in the 70s used to get perms. Is that like weird? I know it kind of makes you nervous, but I think it was like the thing. Do you know what I mean? Seriously. And if you, can I show you a picture of him today? You'll really be shocked. I think this is why he looks this way today. Okay, I think
That's what he looks like before you bring him
yes,
up
yes.
here. Tall. Like all those curves.
Oh, God, I love it.
He wears glasses. Nope. Oh.
Okay, where is he? Did I screw something up? Well, he keeps a hat on. These are my 3 dogs. Remember the one that died I told you about? Oh, my mother's birthday's today. Oh,
We should call him wish her happy birthday.
she's dead.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
That's depressing.
I meant she died in 97. You got to laugh about it. Let me, here's my husband.
That escalated very quickly.
Can you, anyway, he's bald. Let me show you a better picture. Here he is, bald. Do you guys know who this guy is? Oh my gosh, y'all don't know him?
Can't really see him.
Okay, just 2 seconds. I'm telling you, how many of you watched The Voice?
Oh, yeah. He's good.
Did you all remember him?
Yeah.
He's a Minnesotan. He was runner-up. He was playing at the Fine Line Cafe about 3 weeks ago, so we went to it. It's great. Anyway, that wasn't my husband. The bald guy. I think that's why he's bald today, huh? It's those damn perms. Permanence. Oops, I had my lecture on the whole time. Anyway, moving on. How are we going to calculate the margin of safety? Now our job is to calculate, compute the margin of safety in dollars and as a ratio. What is the margin of safety? The amount between break even and what we anticipate the sales to be, right? Margin of safety in dollars. If we anticipate 120,000 minus the 67,200, we've got a margin of safety here of 52,800, and our ratio, margin of safety ratio, is going to be our 52.8 divided by our 120, or 44%. Any questions on that? Yes? No? I don't think we're going to go through every one of the problems we had assigned for this chapter, guys. I want you to, if we go over it in class, what do you need to know? If we do it in class, then we need to know it. If we don't do it in class, do you need to know it? Okay, let's do 6.3. 6.3. Norton Company reports the following operating results for the month of August. Sales of 310,000, which equates to 5,000 units. Variable cost of 210,000 and fixed cost of 75,000. Management is considering the following independent courses of action to increase net income. To increase selling price by 10% with no change in variable costs or sales, or reducing variable costs to 58% of sales, or to reduce fixed costs by 20,000. Our job is to compute the net income to be earned under each alternative. Which course of action would produce the highest net income? This is really, guys, how CVP is used. You take various what-if scenarios and determine the best course of action. Okay? You want to figure this one out? Yes? No? Who wants to? Nobody. Well, we're going to do it. I'm not going to do some hard problems on here. I want you to understand the concepts, okay? So the first thing we're going to do, what is the selling price? It told us the current sales are 310,000. So we're going to find the selling price per unit. Current selling price is going to be 310 divided by 5,000 units, or $62 a unit, right? Right? Now, the first scenario is to increase the selling price by 10%, right?
Yes.
So if we increase the selling price by 10%, it'd be $62 times 110%, which would equal $68.20, right? $68.20, or we can also increase our 310 times 110%. You see what I'm saying? So 310,000 times 110% would equal 341,000. And then from there, increase selling price by 10% with no change in variable or sales volume. Our variable costs are 210, our fixed costs are 75. So if we do this, our variable costs are 210 minus our fixed cost of 75. That gives us a net income of how much? $56,000. So that's the net income using the first approach. Now our job is to determine this what did they want us to do? The second approach is reduce variable cost to 58% of sales. So our variable cost needs to be 58% of sales. So if our net income is 310,000, right? And we need to reduce our variable costs to only 58% of 310,000, right? Which would be what? 179,800 minus our fixed cost of 75,000. What does that give our net income? How much? 310 minus 179.8 minus 75,000. Come on. 55,200. Then our last option is to reduce fixed costs by 20,000. So here we're going to have our reduce fixed costs by 20,000. So that means our 310 is our selling minus our variable cost of 210. We had 75,000 of fixed costs. Now it's going to be 55,000. And what's that going to make the income? What's our best scenario? The first one, isn't it? Okay? First scenario is the best. I've learned the different functions of management, planning, directing, controlling, as well as what managerial accounting is and how the information is used in a business. I've also learned the differences between manufacturing cost, product cost, and period cost. Another thing I've learned was the various costing systems and the pros and cons of each. The last thing that I've learned, not about managerial accounting, but about myself, is that I need to take better notes because that's when I do better on the tests. You guys think that too? In class so far, I've learned about different cost drivers, how they affect prices of products. Also, I've learned a lot about just-in-time processing and the convenience that gives to manufacturers. The biggest thing is activity-based costing and its importance. Some product costs can be misleading under traditional costing methods, so ABC can give us a more accurate measure of how much a product costs to produce. If companies don't use this method for some more specialized products, they could be missing out on increases in their net income. Okay, next, let's move on to the next problem. 6.4. Comfy Airways. Don't you just want to fly that airline? Comfy Airways, a small two-plane passenger airline, has asked for your assistance in some basic analysis of its operations. Both planes seat 10 passengers each, and they fly commuters from Comfy's base airport to the major city in the state, Metropolis. Each month, 40 round-trip flights are made. Shown below is a recent month's activity in the form of a cost, volume, profit, income statement. How does an income statement, cost, volume, profit work? How are they lumped? According to what? Yes, according to variable costs we see and the fixed cost. Our job is to calculate the break-even in dollars and in the number of fares. So, how are we going to calculate the break-even? We first need to come up with the contribution ratio, don't we? So we see that the contribution, the fares of 400 fares is 48,000. Our contribution margin is 30,000. So won't we want to take our contribution margin, or here, contribution margin ratio is 30,000, divide that by our 48,000, or 62.5%. Our break-even point in dollars would be our fixed cost of what? $20,250 divided by our 62.5% ratio, 32,400. Does that make sense? That is how much we need to bring in to break even, to have no income, no loss, to break even. Okay? I've learned what the price something used to be compared to the current rate because of the restaurant story and the corrupt triangle. What restaurant story was there? Can't remember. Maybe I wasn't here that day. Okay, number 2. Without calculations.
We need to calculate the number of fares first.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Calculate the break-even point in dollars and the break-even point in the number of fares. So our round-trip fares are going to be 40. Break-even point in dollars is the 32,400. Okay, and the break-even point in fares, we're going to take our 48,000 divided by 400 fares is equal to $120 a fare. We can take 32,400, divide that by our 120 a fare, and that means 270 fares. I'm sorry about that. Next, B. Without calculations, determine the contribution margin at the break-even point. So basically, the break-even point is going to be fixed cost and contribution margins are equal. So the contribution margin at the break-even point would be how much? What are the fixed costs? 20,000 what? 20,250 are fixed cost. So the contribution margin needs to equal fixed cost, right? So the contribution margin needs to be 20,250, since that is the total fixed cost. Make sense? Okay, next. If fares were decreased by 10%, an additional 100 fares could be generated. However, total variable costs would increase by 20%. Should the fare decrease be adopted? So what do we need to do here? If fares increased by 10%, we could add 100 more fares. But as a result of adding those 100 more fares, we've got variable costs 20% greater. What do you think is going to happen here? What is our fare revenue right now? Fare revenue is $108 times, now we're going to have it at 500 fares, right? And we increased our fare cost by 10%. We decreased. If we decreased, so we were at 120, we're now decreasing at 10%, or 108 times 500 fares. That's going to equal 54,000. But our variable costs are going to go from what? They were at 18,000, and they're going to increase 20%, right? If our variable costs increase 100 or 20%, now they're at 21,600. As a result, our contribution margin is going to be 32,400. What are our fixed costs? $20,250. So our net income would be $12,000 $150. Would that help us? Why? What was our income prior? So by decreasing our fares, but as a result of it increasing our number of flight passengers, ultimately that's going to increase our net income. Okay? You bet. You tell me when I can move on. How many of you guys are left-handed in here? Left-handed. That's wild. None of you are left-handed? I teach with there are 4 of us in the accounting department. 3 out of 4 of us are left-handed. Isn't that weird? I don't know what it means. We're geeks. Okay, let's look at 2 more of these exercises. I do want to do, let's just see here. Let's do E6, 6-6. This is where we're going to do a product mix, okay? Do you see we're just going over the exercises? Do you see that? We're not going to do any problems on this chapter, okay? So if you have anything, it's going to be similar to what we're going over. Okay, exercise 6-6. Yard Tools manufactures lawnmowers, weed trimmers, and chainsaws. Its sales mix and contribution margin per unit are as follows. Lawnmowers 20%, weed trimmers 50%, and chainsaws are 30%. And we see our contribution margin. Yard Tools has fixed cost of $4.2 million. We are supposed to compute the number of units of each product that Yard Tools needs to sell in order to break even under this product mix. So we're going to start by taking each of the sales mixes times the contribution margin, so then we can come up with a weighted average of the contribution margin. So do you see our sales mix times our contribution margin? What we're going to do here, actually I'm going to just get a, so we're basically going to start by having a sales mix percentage then we're going to have our contribution margin per unit. Doesn't like that. Then we're going to have our weighted average contribution margin. Okay? Probably should do it. Anyway. So, we've got here lawnmowers, 20%, $30 contribution margin. The weighted average is going to be the 20% times our 30% or $6, okay? Next, we've got weed trimmers. TRIMMERS. 50% and $20 contribution margin. Then we have our chainsaws, 30%, 40. So our total here weighted contribution is 28 bucks. See how I did that? If our total break-even sales in units is 4,200,000, we need to divide that by our $28 in contribution to come up with 150,000 units we need to produce. Therefore, our sales mix again at, excuse me, our sales mix at 20%, and this is total break-even in units. Total break-even sales in units. If we take 150,000, right? Right? And this would be sales needed, sales units needed per unit. So if we take our 150,000 units, this times this, we'll need 30,000 lawnmowers, 75,000 weed trimmers, and 45,000 chainsaws. Any questions on this? How are we doing, guys? Bored? Excited? Do you want me to keep it sitting here a minute? Tell me when I can move on. We're going to do one last exercise and call it a day. And we'll have the quiz open, hopefully tonight, through next Monday night. Okay? You okay with that? And I'll probably keep it similar to the way they've been. Matching, one or two matching, a couple multiple choice, and one problem. Okay? It's easier to grade. I only do it because it's easier for you. Do you believe that? Okay. Last one we're going to work on. Did I not? Are y'all not done? Golly, I guess. Whoops. Sorry, guys. There. Tell me when. Okay, the last problem we are going to do is exercise 6-9. Okay, 6-9. Palmer Golf Accessories sells, no, that's not the one. $610, sorry, $610, sorry, $275. This is it. Personal Electronics sells iPads and iPods. The business is divided into two divisions along product lines. CVP income statements for a recent quarter's activities are presented below. So we've got each division, less their variable costs, give us the contribution margin, minus our fixed costs, give us our net income. We are to determine the sales mix percentage and contribution margin ratio for each division. So in order to do this, we're going to see the iPad divided by the total to determine the mix, the iPod divided by the total, and then from that figure out the contribution ratios. So let's go here and talk about the sales mix. We've got the iPad division. How much did they make? Their gross revenues were $600,000, and we are going to divide that by the total number of sales. What were the total number of sales in their business? 1 million. What's the percent there? Sales mix, 60%. Yet the iPod division is 400,000 divided by our million sales, bless you, is a 40% mix. Bless you. What is the contribution margin ratio on the iPads? iPad, 180,000 is their contribution margin, divided by their sales of 600,000 gives us 30%. The iPod, 140 divided by their sales of 400,000 gives us 35%. So we're determining the contribution margin ratio per each division. Okay? Questions? Next, if we look here, calculate the company's weighted average contribution margin ratio. Well, you can see here the 180 and the 320 weighted average contribution margin ratio. The weighted average is going to be 320,000 divided by $1 million. It gives us 32%, doesn't it? Right? Another way we could calculate it, guys, we take the 60% times 30%, and then we take the 40% times 35%. So if we were to take 60 times 30 plus the 40 times 35, what do we come up with? 32%. How would we determine our break even in dollars? What are our fixed costs? 120? 120,000 divided by 32% gives us what? 375,000 we need to make. And we can calculate how much that plays out per division, because to play it out per division, we would take this 375 times 60%. We'd need to come up with 225 in that division. And to come up with the iPod division, we'd need to sell 150. Any questions on this at all? Yep, I'm sorry, one sec. What we've gone over in this chapter is what you need to know, nothing more. Okay? The one piece I do want to tell you I want you to take a look at is the term operating leverage. I want you to understand what that term means. But apart from that one term, we've gone over everything in class I want you to be familiar with. Okay? So guys, we're done with chapters 5 and 6. The quiz will be open hopefully this evening, for sure tomorrow. I'll give you till next Monday night. Any questions? How are you guys doing? You learning?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the last calculation, that's the break even? Okay, so that's the break even. So
Well, this
120.
this is the break even in sales. This is how many sales we need to make in order to break even. And this is how we divided it by each division. Okay, guys, you guys have